Hi, I'm Jonathan, and welcome to First Last Everything, a podcast where I chat to guests about their relationship to technology through their first love, last obsessions, and the piece of tech that meant everything to them. Each item a guest brings to the show can be anything from a piece of software to a computer to a weird gadget to that first camera. Pretty much anything goes. This time I'm joined by Riley Testut. Riley is mostly known as the creator of Delta, a hugely popular game emulator, and AltStore, the first official alternative app store available for iOS devices. Riley is really at the forefront of challenging the status quo of how apps are developed and distributed on iOS, and this has frequently pitted himself against both Apple and Nintendo. But as you'll see here, what he's really focused on is a great experience for users. So, First Last Everything with Riley Testut. Let's go. Riley, thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with me today. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling great. I'm excited to talk about tech. I never do that.
Great. So I always start the podcast by asking my guests about their relationship to technology. So Riley, how about you? Do you feel like you have a good relationship with technology?
I think overall, I would say I have a very close relationship with technology, and I would say it's a good relationship, but it's definitely been a very large part of my life since as long as I can remember. And most of it has been for positive reasons, like discovering cool new ways to do stuff or tinker or play games. But also, I'm starting to get to the point when I like to take a break from technology sometimes. I like to go outside, hang out with friends, not talk about tech. Yeah. So I think I'm finding a good balance with that. And of course, I still love it overall. But I think it's important that I'm taking somewhat a step back from it being my whole day-to-day life.
That's good. Yeah, that's good to hear. Well, I think like you mentioned before, your connection to technology is being kind of lifelong, which we'll get into. So I think the best place to start is with your first pick, because it's really kicks off your life in technology. So what's the first pick you have for us? The first piece of technology that you really inspired you?
Yeah. So that would have to be the original NES. And that's because it's one of my earliest memories. My dad just took out the NES he played with him and my mom, and he showed me Super Mario Brothers when I was 3 or 4, and he just showed me this game, and then we spent so much time playing it together, and eventually we played the whole Super Mario Brothers series. We played all 3 games. We both agreed the second one wasn't our favorite, but we still played it anyway from time to time. The third one was absolutely the best for sure. But then I just played even more games on the NES. We played Duck Hunt all the time, because how could you not? Such a cool game.
Yeah.
And even though the NES was, I guess, technically old, because I was born in 95, so it was old by that point, but to me as a kid, I didn't have any reference point, so it was really cool to still play all these games for the first time. And it was, kind of magical, getting to play all that, spend time with my dad.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, I did some maths earlier on, and when you would have had the NES, the SNES would have actually come out when you were about 4, I think. So it came out around about the same time. So it's interesting that your first piece of tech was actually a previous generation for something that had already come out. Did you upgrade to the SNES as a family, or did you stay with the NES?
We stuck with the NES for sure. And then I don't think I had another Nintendo console until the GameCube. Right. Which is also not many people's next console from Nintendo, but it was kind of the NES just got me pretty far, and then I was a PlayStation person for a little bit.
Yeah. So you didn't have a Game Boy then?
Oh, well, I did have the Game Boy, because that was a whole the portable game system was the only one. I was never a PSP person, unfortunately. I know there are a bunch of lovers of that, but I was always Nintendo handhelds, Game Boy, DS. Oh, so good. Yeah.
So, you're obviously a big Nintendo fan, and you've spoken about this a lot as well. And this is kind of where your career has sort of come from. A lot is Apple and Nintendo, this sort of crossroads, if you like. But particularly with Delta and other sort of what you've done there, it's about the retro gaming. It's about the being able to play games from the Game Boy Advance and the SNES and so on your iOS devices. was there a point where you were playing the PlayStation for a while and then you decided to go back to all these games because obviously they become retro after time? Like, yeah. So was there a point in sort of when you were a little bit older where you decided to, right, I want to try these games again, and then sort of that developed into Delta?
Yeah, it kind of basically came down to, so when the Game Boy Advance was big, me and my brother were big into Pokemon. Surprise, surprise. He was the one that showed me Pokemon. We got Fire Red and Leaf Green, and I just fell in love with Pokemon so much. We both did. We obsessed over it. We got Pokemon Emerald, such a good game. We played a bunch of Pokemon, and that was kind of what led me back to Delta. Was I like played all those games as a kid, and then I kind of stopped playing games for a little bit. Or I played games, but not as heavily. And then it was kind of like in high school, I honestly had just gotten my iPhone, and it just occurred to me, this device would be so perfect to play all those old games from my past. Like, it just seemed like such a perfect fit because I was playing like these mobile games, and to me, Pokemon was such a good idea. Like, you can just pick it up and play it. It's very easy controls. And so it just came from like just nostalgia, honestly, being like, oh, I feel like this device, which at the iPhone, I was just obsessing over in general. I thought was so cool and so many possibilities. So to me, it just seemed like the perfect fit. And I don't know, I thought I could maybe do something with that.
Yeah. I love the idea of a 13-year-old having nostalgia. That's just something. It's so funny.
It happens.
Yeah. We always think of like nostalgia as like someone who's a bit older, like my age. I'm in my 40s. Like, nostalgia is really hitting hard now. But it's funny to think of a 13-year-old having nostalgia about when they were even younger.
Oh, I actually forgot. Yeah, one of the things that triggered that was my friend, we found out we could put Pokemon on our calculators, or like our TI-84 calculators.
Oh, cool.
And so we did that in science class, and that's where I was like, hold on, if I can do it on a calculator, you should be able to put this on a phone.
Yeah,
and that was like it.
I mean, you spoke about, you're 13 and you were inspired by the first iPhone you had, which was it a 3G you had? A 3GS?
Yep,
yeah.
The 3G.
Yeah. And it inspired you to develop your first game, which was called Shoot Around, which you were so young that your mom had to release it under like a developer account that she made because you were so young that you couldn't get your own account. So tell me about what that experience was like at such a young age to be developing an app that got onto the App Store.
Oh, it was so incredible. And also, I'll say, my mom's name is still in the App Store. Like, if you look at Delta, it still says the seller is Riley Testut, because that is something you can't change. Like, I've tried to talk to Apple, and it's just too hard to change. So I've accepted that.
Amazing.
But yeah, so it's basically, I got the iPhone 3G, and I just fell in love with it. I thought all the apps on it were the coolest thing I'd ever tried out. Like Tap Tap Revenge, all of that, just the early days, the beer drinking app. Literally just the idea that you could do so much stuff with it just got me so excited. And I basically just decided, you know what? I want to do something with this. I really want to like build something. And I didn't really know what to build. And so I like bought myself a book to teach myself programming. And then eventually I like was listening to a podcast and someone said, it'd be a cool idea to make an app where you could like shoot lasers at people. And I was like, boom, excellent. I'll build that app. And so I just put together this very basic app that literally just showed a camera feed in the background and had like two buttons, A and B, that I made in Paint, Microsoft Paint, to decorate. Yeah. And then it just shot out virtual lasers. And it was incredibly just like basic. But just working on it was just so rewarding. And it really just motivated me to keep going at it. And so then I was able to put it in the App Store. I saved up money to get the developer account to put it in the App Store. And I remember just waking up the first day I was in the App Store and seeing it. And I don't know, it's just almost like magical. Like, wow, I built this thing and now it's in the store that anyone with an iPhone can download. And that dopamine rush, honestly, just really just encouraged me to keep going with it. And I didn't know what I would do. I just knew that I wanted to keep building apps. I just keep wanting to make things to put out there.
Yeah.
And just I don't know. It's just so fun.
It kind of reminds me that concept for Shoot Around kind of reminds me of an app that I think it was developed by, was it Bad Robot, maybe J.J. Abrams' company, or it's something they did like a VFX sort of things you could record something, a video, and then you could just sort of position like explosions in the video that
Oh,
you'd done.
yeah. No,
I
I
don't know
do
if you
that.
remember that. It kind
Yes.
of reminds me of that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's similar.
Yeah. So you said also that you initially wanted to become like a video game developer at Nintendo. That's kind of like an early dream of yours, but you ended up focusing on emulators in high school. So how did that all come about?
It was honestly got kind of roundabout way. The real way I came across it was, I was just perusing the internet one day, and I came across this open source repository on GitHub for an SNES emulator was actually what I found. And there were instructions on how you could compile it in Xcode to put on your own phone outside the App Store. And I was just like, wait, hold on. You can just do this? I can just download this code and install this already fully made emulator on my phone? And so I did that. And then I literally like played SNES games with my friends at school on our phones. Because then I made it like work on iPad. So I brought my iPad to school and I made our phones as the controllers.
Oh, wow.
And so we were playing Street Fighter on like my iPad. And that was like the very, very beginnings. But my heart wasn't in the SNES. Like that wasn't the system I loved. So then I was basically, can I build this idea for a system that really means a lot to me? So that's when I like started looking around and I found similar code base for Game Boy Advance, a Game Boy Advance emulator called GPS Phone. That was a jailbreak emulator. And I just was like, you know what? Let's see if I can turn this into an app that I can build on my phone. Because I downloaded it and it did not work by default. There were a bunch of compiler errors, but I just and it was just for a passion project. I just wanted to do it for me. I wasn't looking to really do anything with it. I just literally wanted to put Pokemon on my phone, basically.
Right.
And so I just spent months hacking away at it and eventually got a really prototype version working on my phone that could show the title screen. And again, like once I got that working and I heard like the sound of like Pokemon Emerald, all that playing, that to me was another like real moment of realizing, wait, this is really cool, and I want to keep doing this.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a certain attraction, like a kind of like almost like a bootleg attitude with like these emulators that you were making in high school. Were you kind of like fulfilling this like rebellious streak of this, you kind of maybe shouldn't be doing this, but you're doing it anyway, and you and your mates are sort of getting away with this?
It kind of felt fun like that because jailbreaking was big at the time in general, and I wasn't a jailbreaker, but I wanted to still like have some of that fun stuff from jailbreaking. So it was kind of in that realm of, we can get this fun app that's not allowed in the App Store, and you can do stuff that other people can't do. Like we would show our friends, like, look, we can play Pokemon on our phones, and they thought that was super cool, and it was cool because not everyone could do it. Yes, in addition to just being cool.
Yeah, and it became kind of a big hit, like outside of your school at some point. How did that come about? How did it get out from your circle of friends?
So that was a big transition, I think, for my thought process towards all this. It was just for my friends, I compiled it, and then there was a service that basically allowed you to connect open source GitHub projects and compile them and sign them with an enterprise certificate, which is what companies use to distribute apps internally. So basically it meant I could put GBA for iOS, the Game Boy emulator, on GitHub and hook it up to the service. And with a button press, it would generate an app that just anyone could download from the web. Just how it worked. It basically pretended that everyone was an employee of quote unquote my company, and they could just download it for free from my website.
Your mum's company.
Exactly. Yeah, of course. And basically I just put that on my website, and that kind of just blew up. It got way more popular than I thought. It literally got millions of downloads, and I did no real marketing or anything. I just put it on GitHub, talked about it, and there's this huge demand immediately for installing emulators. And that's when I realized, hold on, like this is a real market here. There's people really want this, and it's not being addressed by the App Store. And that just like idea then just stuck with me, just knowing going forward, hold on, something should be done about this.
What was that feeling of like being like a kid in high school and experiencing this like viral success, that you were kind of someone who was known online for doing this sort of thing? Like what sort of feelings is that for like a kid? Like, you were, how old were you when was that? About what, 13, 14?
That was like when I was 17.
So I was 17.
18.
Okay,
yeah, 17. Yeah, but I mean, it was incredible. It was so very surreal at first, because I would just see like people talk about it more and more online. I would like search on Twitter and see more tweets about it. But then it like really grew, and I started seeing like news articles about it. And so then it was just really cool. And then everyone at my school just started knowing me as like the app guy. That just became the thing.
Yeah.
And I thought so. It was really awesome. And then at my graduation, like I got a shout out from like the valedictorian for like making apps. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like it became like this known thing that I was making apps that were like kind of doing well. Like people didn't know super the whole details, but just knew that, oh, I was making apps. And people were fine. What was cool is people would go to like their other high schools or hang out with their friends from other high schools, and those friends would have GBA for iOS on their phones.
Wow.
And so people would just find that out organically.
You had clout, as the kids say, I think.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we'll move on to your next pick, which is the last piece of technology that you've really been enjoying. What have you got?
Yeah, that was an easy one, but definitely pretty nerdy. I love the Fediverse. The recent, just like, which I feel like I need to explain for people who don't know what it is. But high level, the Fediverse is like the idea that a bunch of disconnected, independent, I'll say for now, social networks can talk to each other and interoperate between each other, which sounds very abstract. So now I'll go more specific in why I like it. So basically, back like a bunch of people in the Apple community, when Elon took over Twitter, I wasn't a big fan of a lot of the changes they made. And so a bunch of us moved to Mastodon, a similar service that provided like a similar functionality to Twitter, but was open source and wasn't owned by Elon and was part of something called the Fediverse. And what that meant was once we all joined Mastodon was its own social network, basically like Twitter. But from Mastodon, you could follow accounts from other social networks, like what came later, Threads. So Meta's Threads app is compatible with Mastodon. They're two completely different social networks, and yet it's possible to follow people between them, to like people between them, do all that stuff. And basically, once the Apple community switched over to Mastodon, and I'll add, once my favorite app, Tweetbot, was killed by Elon, because I use Tweetbot every single day. That was my favorite app of all time. And so once that was killed, honestly, it was a no-brainer for me to switch to something else because I hated the Twitter app. And then Ivory came along, which is Tweetbot from the same developers for Mastodon.
Yeah.
And so once I started using Ivory, and once I was following the same people I'd already been following on Twitter, I'd basically recreated my Twitter experience, except now there was so much more potential. And so that was a few years ago. And the more I was on Mastodon, the more I just kind of got red-pilled by the idea of, hey, social networks really shouldn't be like this closed black box where you just start up a follower base on one and then you start up another follower base on another one. There really should just be this idea of a universal social profile. And it doesn't matter where you are. You can just have your social account. Like, I'm Riley Testut at Mastodon.social, but then a bunch of my friends are on Threads. But it doesn't matter because we can still follow each other. And for a long time, that was really cool. But then what really changed is this year, I went to South by Southwest. And there was the Fediverse House, which is hosted like Mike McHugh, like the CEO of Flipboard. And I went there, and basically I was fully red-pilled by the idea of this concept of the Fediverse is not just for social networks. It's not just you can follow and like people across anything. It can be for anything, any type of content. It can be for videos. It can be for photos. But it can also be for more abstract stuff. And that's when we started thinking, me and my co-founder Shane for AltStore, which I guess I should get to at some point, but we were realizing this idea of an open social network solved so many problems for us in building an app store. We wanted to have like more discoverability. We wanted to have more like user activity, but we didn't want to build a social network from scratch. We don't want people to have to make an account and join over. And so we were like, what if we could combine these two ideas and like take this open source idea of this social network and apply it to an app store? And that, I don't know, we're getting really nerdy here, but that just idea was really exciting to me.
We like it. Get as nerdy as possible.
It just showed the potential, I think, of like, all this stuff is really coming together over the past few years. And because I've got to see it grow from, I mean, it's been around for a lot longer, but I've now seen it from become like Mastodon as a primary focus of the Fediverse to now there's a lot of different aspects and different social networks. And yeah, the fact that Threads is even a part of it right now, I don't know, to me is one of the biggest stories in tech that the Fediverse is growing. And that just excites me for the future.
Yeah, true. I think what immediately strikes me about the Fediverse as your pick is kind of its similarities to the sort of the things that you're fighting for with AltStore, like this idea of openness and not being restricted or controlled by like larger corporations and their sort of wants and needs and things like that. There's obviously, I mean, like you've talked about there with AltStore, like you see that connection there, and it almost is kind of not a surprise that this is your pick, because it just seems to ring true to almost like your values and your what really excites you about technology and software and things like that, right?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. Like there really is just so much alignment, I feel like, in our philosophies for AltStore, in Mastodon, the Fediverse, like you said. We're just wanting to give control back to like people. We want the developers, the indies, or the independent like posters just to have power that's not like being restricted by any gatekeepers, just in any sense of the word. We just want to empower people to put their content out there.
Yeah. So, I think the big question with the Fediverse that I think a lot of people have is that I think a lot of people like yourself can see the potential, and people like the idea of it. And really, it has this positive, I guess, like philosophy on openness. But do you ever see the Fediverse becoming a mainstream and living up to this promise? Because it's still kind of this smaller community, much smaller community. A lot of people tend to be tech users, like you say, like the Apple community and so forth. Do you think it's ever going to live up to that promise, or do you think it'll always be smaller communities like Mastodon?
No. I think it's a good question. I am very bullish about the future of the Fediverse, but I think it needs to have the user experience as a whole solved. Or not solved, just improved. And that's also kind of what excites me so much is there's a lot of raw technology here that can power so many cool things, but at the same time, the average consumer it's too complex for them, for sure. Like a lot of these concepts and the way they're introduced to them right now is just too much. And it excites me because to me, it's very similar to the discussions I've had about emulators for the past decade. When my stance had been to the beginning, people like emulators. That concept of playing old software on new devices is not nerdy. That is a universal concept. But basically, the majority of emulators were kind of focused for the nerds, were aimed at those type of people that it was so hard for regular users to adopt it. And that's what Delta was so important to me. I wanted to make an emulator that could completely just like paper over all like the technical difficulties and just make it super easy to use. And I felt like that would make this idea work. And I guess to me, it seems like it has. And so I think the same thing has to happen to the Fediverse is the technology is really cool. We need to get people to use it in a way that's not putting the tech in their face. And I think so for AltStore, it's like, we're going to have comments in AltStore. We're going to have likes in AltStore. But we're not going to say, these are Fediverse likes, these are Fediverse. You'll just log in with your Threads account or your Mastodon account or your Blue Sky account, and you will just comment and like and view stuff. But that to me is, I think, the next step is making these applications that are using this in the back end. But still, so I think Threads is a very good example of that. For as much negative we can say about Meta, I do think Threads specifically is doing a good job of tiptoeing people and getting the average person aware of even the Fediverse. And I think that's a very difficult job. But I do think Threads is actually doing a decent job of doing that. I think they could be doing more, but that's why I think this is going to be the process, is figuring out how to get people to use it without shoving Fediverse in their face.
Yeah, it feels like almost people shouldn't be using the word Fediverse in a way. It's just sort of, it sounds very, like metaverse or, alternate universes and stuff like that. It sounds very technical, like it sounds very complicated.
Yeah, I should say people are calling it the open social web, which I actually like more as a term. I'm just so used to calling it the Fediverse, I still kind of say it.
So you developed GBA for iOS, and that was getting around to various other schools and colleges, and it was getting around the web, and becoming this pretty successful app. And then you started getting the attention of Apple and Nintendo. Nintendo issued you with a cease and desist notice for using their logos. And so you tried to solve that by removing their logos, and then they kept going. So can you remember what that feeling was like to realize that? Were you intimidated at all?
I think just what I remember was immediately my heart sinking when I realized what had happened, because from my perspective, GBA for iOS, all of a sudden the website had just gone down that I was running, and I was like, why is it down? And I had to go to GitHub to find out, because I was running off of GitHub pages. And that's when I saw the DMCA notice from Nintendo, and I was like, I don't know what to do about this. Like,
so they just issued that without even contacting you. They just
they didn't
straight to the site.
So I found out because everyone just started complaining that it wasn't working, and I was like, I didn't change anything. And so at that point, I had to be like, I actually don't know what to do here. That's when I started to realize, oh, this is a little bit bigger than like this like small project if Nintendo's like sending this. But honestly, my biggest concern was, how can I just get GBA back up? I was like, okay, what can I do to make it available again? And that's when we talked to like my friend's dad, who happened to be a copyright like lawyer, or someone who specializes in that's part of the law. I'm not a lawyer. And he explained, like, yes, this was because we were using Nintendo logos in GBA for iOS, because we just had Nintendo logo all over the place. And so they said, if you remove that stuff, you will be compliant. But it's up to you if you want to take that risk and see if Nintendo still will come after you. And as a naive teenager, I was kind of like, okay, I think we're good to go. And so I just put it back up there. But then that we didn't hear back from them actually after that. And so I don't know, that kind of just like made me even more motivated. Like, okay, this is a big deal, and now we've gotten past Nintendo. So maybe this could be even bigger if we got past that first roadblock.
Did you ever feel like you were doing something wrong? Because there's some that kind of argue that these emulators encourage people to sort of download all these ROMs from online, the ones for games that they don't actually own. So there is that argument there. And so how did you ever think about that? Okay, maybe I'm enabling like almost like piracy here. How do you feel about that?
I was more naive at the time, and I think I didn't really think about it and how easy it was, or really the implications of it. But it is something I quickly learned was something I should be much better about, because in the beginning, or GBA for iOS included the ability to even download ROMs. If you like search for went to web yourself, went to a website and download ROMs, because I wanted to make the process as easy as possible. And like that was my original stance, my naive stance, like make it as easy as possible. And I had to realize, okay, never mind. Being as easy as possible does come into conflict with the legalities of all this stuff. And I had to backtrack a bunch of those features from GBA for iOS that I intended to make the process easier, where I had to be like, actually, you know what? I can't be promoting this because this is too far. This is encouraging people to be going the wrong direction, when I want people to be doing legal stuff, like backing up the ROMs with tools and stuff like that. Yeah. But that was a learned thing for sure.
I guess you could look, you could look at that incident there, this the battle with Nintendo and then subsequently Apple as well. It's almost like the inciting incident in your life, really, because you can see the rest of your life pan out from this moment. I think if you'd have decided, okay, I'm out, and just taken it down and then backed away and been gone off and done whatever, gone to college, to all your other stuff, then you would have had a very different life. But you followed through with this and you kept going. What was that motivation for doing that?
So that's when Apple kind of comes a lot into the picture. Is I knew GBA for iOS was so much, and then eventually the workaround I used to get it distributed stopped working because Apple fixed it. It's not too important, but I kind of didn't want to do an unofficial app anymore. I was like, this is really cool. I can see the potential. I really want to make an official emulator in the App Store. And so I went to Apple at WWDC 2015 and talked to the app review team and basically asked, is there any way I can build an emulator that would be App Store compliant and that they would approve? And they told me, yes, you can do that. They just want me to like basically send App Review a list of games they want to approve at the same time, so that they can make, and then Delta would have like a allow list of games that were approved by App Review. Because they were saying they were worried about the pipeline, and I was like, fine, whatever, I don't care. I'll make sure you review Pokemon, Mario, Zelda, all the important stuff first, and then we'll add more over time. And so it was because I got that like approval from Apple that made me think, okay, you know what? Let's really build this for real. Like, let's build a real app for real people that anyone like can just download from the App Store super easily, and I'll be compliant with the App Store the whole way. And so I started working on Delta, and I spent like, that was college. I spent majority of my my sophomore year building this app, trying to get it ready for the App Store. And then I came to WWDC next year, and that's when the same person I met with told me, actually, never mind. I talked to the executives or the higher ups. We don't allow emulators at all in the App Store. And it was just because I then had gotten to that point, I felt like I couldn't just turn away from it. Like I didn't want to like have wasted a whole like year of my life. And so it kind of just like, I felt forced into, I'm not going to throw away this work. I think it's a really cool app.
Yeah.
And so I just was like kind of reluctant, but fine, I'll just find some other way to get it out there. Because I felt like I had no other choice. And I had specifically done this because I didn't want to do an unofficial app again. But now I had built it, and I felt like it deserved to exist.
Yeah. So what was the next step from that in terms of figuring out how to get that app out there, how to get Delta out there?
That's basically then when AltStore started coming into the picture. Is right around, I think that same year, Apple announced the ability for anyone with an Apple ID, so basically anyone, to install apps from Xcode onto their iPhone for free, because they wanted to encourage students to be able to learn Swift and put that on their devices. And I saw that, and I was like, hey, that means it's free to install apps from outside the App Store, is what I saw. And I just knew, I was like, okay, there's something there. And then I basically spent like the next year of college building a prototype tool that, just for sake of this, pretended to do exactly what Xcode did and could sign in with your Apple ID, set your device or account to be a developer, and then install apps onto your phone as if they were your own apps, like developed by you.
Yeah.
And so I built like this really rinky-dink like tool to like prototype it, and then I hooked it up and installed Delta like from my computer with my Apple ID to my phone, and I got that working. I was like, cool, this like that's prototype that works. I just need to now build this into like an actual thing that could be shipped that people could use.
I mean, you were at USC in California studying
Yep.
computer science at the time, and you're in this position where you're like a young solo developer who's like building this app that's kind of pushing all these boundaries of like, you know, one of the world's largest companies, really. Did that, I mean, did that ever seem like as nuts as that maybe sounds when I read that back to you? Because it does to me, like as some, like when I was that age, I certainly wasn't doing anything near that. But you're like at the forefront of sort of like testing these boundaries of apps on iOS and iPad OS as well.
It is kind of as nuts as it sounds. Because when I do stop to think about it, I am like, this is crazy, the situation I'm in, or that everything's happened. But it's like I got here step by step by what I felt just needed to happen. Like, it was just like, you know what? I need to do this thing because I need to get Delta out there. And if I'm going to do this for Delta, I might as well build it for a bunch of other apps as well. Make it like a whole store. And if I'm going to do this, like, I might as well do that. I don't know. It just, every step just seemed inevitable, or the natural right consequence. So I never was like, let's take on Apple. It's just like, at someday, eventually it came to the point when, we now had like an official app store. And now we were directly competing with Apple, and it just happened all of a sudden, kind of.
Yeah. Is this where Shane came in, your partner with AltStore? How did you meet Shane, and how did you two sort of come together to work on AltStore?
Oh yeah, Shane's very important because so I'd been working on Delta just by myself. So Shane's my roommate from college, and we've lived together for 10 years now, so best friend. And I was working on Delta for like originally just by myself, and I would just like hang out with him and we'd talk through things. And he was actually the person that convinced me to make a Patreon in the first place. He was the one that said, "Hey, there's like really this movement towards supporting creators. I think it'd be really cool if like you just made that your way of making revenue or making money." Because up until that point, I had like been doing contract gigs for random startups or random things that weren't too interesting. And Shane was the first to say, you could turn Delta, a free app, into an actual like business to support yourself. And so I did that for like a couple years, and it proved the idea that it could work. But basically a couple years in, I quickly realized running AltStore, because I launched AltStore as a service in 2019, and that was like a year after I graduated. And then from that point on, it was a real service that anyone could use to distribute their apps outside the App Store. You like put their app files on the web, people download them and silo it through AltStore. And that worked, but then that started to grow more and more. And it started to be a lot for me to handle as one person. But then the real like change was basically once we started to see that the European Commission had started investigating Apple, or they started the process of like passing the DMA. I forget the exact beginning, but I started to see that the movement was happening, and I wanted to be there for whatever moment that was, and I knew that I couldn't do it by myself. I was kind of overworked. So I basically told Shane, hey, let's turn this like rinky-dink alt store into a real legitimate app store in preparation for someday that there will be a law passed that will allow it. And I brought him on board, and then the pitch was to move to New Zealand because I'm a New Zealand citizen, and I thought it'd be really cool to work there. But it was in the middle of COVID. It's incredible. Oh God, I love it there. But
I'd love to go back.
It was the middle of COVID, and they didn't really want Shane to come for obvious reasons. But so we moved to Dallas, Texas instead. Basically the same thing, you know. Same vibe.
Pretty much the same.
And that's when we started working together full time and just like building up what would become AltStore Pal, the real app store.
Right. After you finished college, Apple actually approached you for a job, right? To work on their watchOS team.
Yes.
And you ultimately, obviously, as we know, you turned that down. Why did you do that?
Because I literally asked them, could I still work on Delta if I was working on the team? And they were basically, no, you have to give up Delta. And again, I was like, I've spent years building it. I'm not just gonna not work on it. And I think that's a ridiculous rule by Apple that they don't allow the developers to have their own apps. I mean, I could go on for about dumb things by Apple, but that one is really dumb to me because it just shows how much potential, like talent, they're not getting because of that.
We'll be back to find out Riley's everything pick in just a minute. But this is the part of the show where we take a break and take a look into the past to talk about a piece of technology that you may not have heard of. Weird, ahead of its time, an abject failure or success. Whatever it was certainly something. Back at the turn of the century, email was the hot new thing. Broadband hadn't arrived, but the idea that you could send messages instantly across the world was blowing up. To do so, however, people needed access to a computer, and getting one at home connected to the internet was still quite expensive. Alan Sugar's UK-based technology company Amstrad spotted what they saw was a gap in the market. What if consumers could access their email easily in a form factor everyone was familiar with, a phone? And so the Amstrad emailer was born. This landline phone featured a 5.8-inch LCD screen and a slide-out QWERTY keyboard. The device would dial out to Amstrad's own AmServe service to check email and, later, make video calls. This sounds very quaint today, but the idea had potential, so much so that phone network British Telecom signed on to support the infrastructure. Updated versions even added colour screens and a library of 40 games. So why don't we have emailer devices in our homes today? Well, according to Sugar, the main reason was timing. Broadband has started to see rapid adoption shortly after the launch, so the limited idea of checking and sending emails from a phone quickly seemed old. But really, its true downfall was, like so many of these ideas, its implementation. For one, this was incredibly expensive to run. Amstrad sold the emailer at a loss, so they were already trying to recoup the costs through people's use of the service. This meant every call out to check your email costed 20p a go. The emailer even did this a couple of times a day, whether you told it to or not. Games were 50p to rent for only 4 days. And as if this wasn't user hostile enough, the device also showed ads. That wasn't just to get revenue either. Sugar saw it as a large-scale in-home advertising network, and who wants that? Amstrad's in-house creator Bob Watkins resigned a year after its launch due to bad sales, but surprisingly the device kept going until 2011 when the service was eventually shut down. Alan Sugar stated that at the time that it was discontinued, it had eventually broken even, though of course never provided any real proof of that. The emailer was a device with a decent idea, but a really bad, almost user-hostile rollout. Sometimes the world of tech moves too fast, and this time the emailer was quickly left in the dust. Check out the show notes for more details on this past curiosity. Before we start getting into the crazy part of your life, the crazier part of your life, we'll have your last pick, which is your everything pick, the piece of technology that means everything to you. What did you pick for that?
Yeah, this one was a hard one because, I mean, I mentioned tech is a big part of my life, and there's so many influential moments of it. But when I really thought about it, I did have to say it. My answer for my everything is the whole Kingdom Hearts series. God, I just freaking love that series so much, and I can't even really justify it because at this point it's gone so far, but I don't know. My family's a huge Disney family. Like, we went to Disney World so much as a kid. I had my 5th birthday and my 18th birthday at Disney World.
You should probably explain exactly what Kingdom Hearts is, because it's kind of involved. I was not that familiar with it. I was sort of very aware of it, and then I reading up on it. It's quite an involved game, so maybe you could explain the concept of it.
Yeah. PlayStation 2, a game, Kingdom Hearts, came out, and the idea was it was a Disney game crossover with Final Fantasy, high level. So you would play as a character, and you'd go to different Disney worlds. Like, you'd go to Agrabah from Aladdin, or you'd go to Wonderland from Alice in Wonderland. And along the way, you'd also interact with Final Fantasy characters, like Cloud, like Sephiroth, like Leon. And so on the surface, a ridiculous idea. People were like, how could this work? How could you combine Hercules with Cloud Strife? Like, these are two completely different vibes. How could you have Tarzan in the same realm as Yuffie? But as a kid, I actually didn't know what Final Fantasy was. I was like, oh, this is just a really cool game where you can just go to a bunch of Disney worlds and play through like the Disney movies. Yeah. And so basically the first game was just such a good game that validated this concept of crossovers. Like, today, that's not a new idea, but it was so foundational to have crossovers between only between all these different Disney movies, where you can go around, and the storyline doesn't really matter. Just you go into each world defeating monsters. In the game, you defeat a super bad villain, but just the premise is you go to different movies. You basically play through Disney movies as one whole plot, and I don't know. I just thought that was so cool as an idea, but then what really made this freaking series to me so important is they released then a sequel game, Kingdom Hearts 2. And that game is incredible. Like, absolutely one of my favorite games of all time, because the storyline in there is surprisingly captivating and deep for a children's game. Like, again, this is a game aimed for kids. I was 8 when I was playing it. And so the original game, Kingdom Hearts, was a nice, friendly, going through Disney worlds, defeating villains, defeating Maleficent, defeating Disney villains, kind of what you'd expect. And then Kingdom Hearts 2 introduces so much backstory, so much lore, a whole new team of completely original villains. They introduce new characters that then they kind of kill off. And it's just this very mature game that follows up the first game and improves on everything that I loved about the first game. And I don't know, it was just so instrumental for me, growing up. Me and my brother also just played Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 so much as a kid. We would play it hours. And then the series has continued on since, and it's gotten I don't need to go too much into it. They've kind of definitely lost, I think, a lot of the ideas that they need to keep it simple, and they've kind of expanded. They've added time travel and stuff. They've added a bunch of things that don't need to be in the story. But I don't know. Just it still remains just the feelings I felt playing Kingdom Hearts 2, and like in my projects in Delta, I have an internal framework for like all my Swift code, Objective-C code I use in all my projects.
Yeah.
And I called that framework Roxas, which is named after my favorite character from Kingdom Hearts 2.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It's like, yeah, it's just this random game that shouldn't have worked, or this game series that, I don't know, just really hit. And I was also the perfect age for when it came out. And yeah, just really captivated everything I loved about Disney, about video games in one package.
Yeah. Do you go back and play it now? I mean, there's been obviously the subsequent games, but do you ever go back now and replay some of the earlier games?
Oh, definitely. I'm playing Kingdom Hearts 2 on my Steam Deck right now.
Right.
Really great. It's just like, yeah, just a fun game to return to after all this time, even though it probably is a little outdated, or it is outdated at this point for some things, but I don't know. I just never get tired of seeing random Disney characters interact in weird ways. It's just fun.
And it was available on Game Boy Advance, right? So can you technically get it on Delta then?
Yes, you could technically. They had Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2, but then they had another game, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, that was between those games in the storyline and only on the Game Boy Advance. And so, yes, I loved it, but it was just funny because most people didn't play this game. So people played Kingdom Hearts 1, then played Kingdom Hearts 2, and did not have any of this like backstory that this Game Boy Advance game introduced.
Right.
But like as a kid, that's why I loved it. I was like, oh, that's so deep. The series has like so many different parts. I can play it across different systems. But then they took that idea too far, and then you had to own like a PSP and a mobile phone and like a 3DS and a PlayStation to get the whole story.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's too much.
Yeah, that's maybe what they were going for with the cross franchise thing. Get you to spend more money on gaming. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, let's get on to the kind of the big crazy part of your life, which is probably the last, I guess, 4 or 5 years maybe.
Yeah.
Which is seeing you fly around the world to meet Apple. You've collaborated with one of the largest game companies in the world with Epic. So I guess we should start where you found yourself after college. You turned down your offer with Apple. What did you do next? Did you have your mind like firmly set on your next steps? Did you know exactly what you were doing?
By the time I graduated, I knew that I wanted to finish AltStore, make Delta like a real app, get out there, and then turn AltStore into a real thing that like, and that's kind of nebulous, just a real app store in the future. And so that is what I focused on for like the first few years after college. It was mostly this AltStore, the sideloading tool. We were making it as easy as possible to sideload apps from like Delta, but also a bunch of other apps that existed, primarily emulators. Honestly, was the biggest draw. And then it was when the Digital Markets Act in Europe was basically being formulated, drafted up, whatever the term, is when we then started shifting our priorities to, okay, let's now build up the foundation for what could be a real legitimate app store. And we didn't even know at the time what that would be. We just saw that legislation was being passed, and we wanted to turn AltStore into whatever we needed it to be. And so we focused on that for like from 2023, basically all of 2023 was us like turning the sideloading tool and kind of expanding upon it, like adding like more store functionality to it, like better store pages, better discoverability, stuff like that in preparation for like maybe making a real store someday. And then that finally happened when the DMA, they passed that in 2023. And so then we finally knew, okay, there's actually going to be third-party app stores in the EU. And so we just built that up, built AltStore Classic. And I just remember like the deadline was March 5th, 2025, and 2024. And then January 2024 came, and we still had not heard anything from Apple about how this is going to work. And so me and Shane were just like, the law goes into effect in 3 months, and Apple said nothing. And then I remember it was at the end of January that Apple like dropped all of like how they're going to comply, all the information about alternative marketplaces. And that basically gave us a 1.5 month crazy sprint to get everything ready to launch AltStore as a legitimate app store in the European Union.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, it was, pretty crazy times. I guess you were then shifting to almost like a legitimate business in a way. Are you fund at this point? Are you sort of funding everything through your Patreon?
so yeah, at this point, everything had been like all was Patreon. So it was just me and Shane. We split our salaries 50-50 from whatever Patreon gave us, and that's how we did everything. And then finally, yeah, we built up this thing. And I remember Apple actually invited us out to like Ireland to help us like test out AltStore in preparation, because we had applied to be an AltStore app store, and they said, "Okay, cool, come to our lab in Ireland. We'll help you build it." And that was when we found out for the first time how much Apple was not ready for the DMA, because we arrived and we had AltStore ready to go. We had, cool, can we launch? The law comes into effect tomorrow. And they just were not ready. They did not think we would have AltStore ready to go. They expected us to have it like a brand new prototype. And that just led to, I can skip through a lot, but because of that, we thought we were going to be in like Ireland for 2 weeks max. We ended up being stuck in Europe as a whole for 2 months, because we were literally just like waiting for Apple to approve AltStore. And it was just the most ridiculous time, because we're like, literally just every day or every week we would travel to a new country and just wait around until Apple gave us a go ahead, because we couldn't test AltStore unless we were in Europe, of course. So the only way we could test that it worked was to physically be there, and we could get approval any single day. So we didn't want to fly home to fly back again. So we just stayed waiting there. And then just like, long story short, 2 months later, Apple changes the App Store rules to allow emulators in the App Store. And then the next day, they approve us to distribute AltStore in the EU. Just like so we knew basically they had taken their time to figure out what were they going to do about us. And then they decided they'll allow emulators in the App Store. And then we were okay to launch. And so it was just like the most on the nose, just frustrating situation that
must have been that must have been an incredible day, though, just to have that. And also because you had the bonus of not just allowing app stores, alternate app stores in the EU, but a worldwide allowance for emulators, or should we say, quote, retro emulators. And then Delta goes from being this kind of cult hit, favorite amongst people who know, if you know, you know, to being the most popular app on the App Store. So you go from this like cult following to just being this huge success. Like, well, how does that feel for both of you? Just going from like, working in the, I guess like the in working in, I was going to say in the dirt, but that sounds a bit bad. But like, go to like superstar status in a way.
It was truly one of the most surreal moments like of my life. Like that whole launch, how everything played out, and also just like how specifically everything came together. Like, Shane was trying to go to this music festival with friends that happened to be like this weekend in April, and it was like our last possible day to launch, and so we were still waiting for Apple to get the approval, and then we got the approval just in time. So then we launched AltStore. We celebrated. We woke up the next day. Delta was like literally the top app in the App Store. Yeah. I couldn't believe it, because we were still like on an adrenaline shock from launching AltStore, and I'm just waking up. I was like opening my phone and seeing, wow, Delta's #1 app. And then we flew home literally that day because we bought tickets last minute. Shane got to go to his music festival that he really wanted to go to. He ended up meeting his current girlfriend there. And so just like,
there you go.
It was kind of like, wow, a bunch of things just like worked out well. And then I just remember the next 2 weeks, I would just like check the App Store charts and just like see Delta at #1. And just like, I don't know, I really can't express how truly bizarre and incredible that feeling was, just to see like validation that yes, Delta was a popular idea. Because like I mentioned before, I had discussed so many times with people who thought emulators were just always going to be nerdy and never something that regular people could enjoy. And this was finally kind of showing, no, it is possible. Like, people can just enjoy these things if it's presented in a good way.
Yeah,
So, very validating to see it number one.
Yeah, and I also, as a sort of an addendum to that story, it's very funny how it got knocked off number one was a donut app that was offering people free donuts if they downloaded their app. So people literally had to be bribed into buying an app to get you off number one.
We were happy with that. We're like, if there's a way to go down, I respect that, because you can't compete with free donuts. It was like 2 weeks at number one, which is just like still like crazy to me that could happen again, because we didn't have any marketing, we didn't do anything, we just announced to the world we have an app store, and now Delta's in the app store, and it was just popular.
What would, now that this has kind of happened, like there's these alternate app stores in the EU, and I think we could all kind of assume eventually it's going to come to the rest of the world, whenever that is. What kind of apps do you expect to kind of like flourish from this situation, now that developers have like more distribution and paths beyond the app store and more openness to, I guess, like being able to do various things? Like, for example, one of your apps on the AltStore is an app called Clip, which is a system clipboard, which you cannot do on Apple's sort of standard iOS release. What other apps do you think you sort of expect to sort of come out of this situation going forward?
So I think, apps like Clip is one thing I think we will see a lot more of going forward, which is just high-level apps that work within the bounds of what iOS allows, but that app review doesn't allow. So like Clip, it just runs in the background and tracks your clipboard whenever you want, like a normal clipboard manager. But apps in the App Store aren't allowed to run in the background forever. But Clip can just like, quote unquote, not tracks, but like use your location just to stay in the background. But it works. It works well. And that's like a simple idea. Or there's another app that was popular for a bit. It let you CarPlay anything from put anything on your phone up on CarPlay. So if you wanted just to like essentially mirror your screen on CarPlay, you could. And that was just like a cool use case for some things. Like you could play some videos in your car or whatever, something like that. And so I think we'll see a bunch of those, or just like general types of apps aren't allowed in the App Store. But what I'm hoping for is also to become a really good spot just for indies in general, to just have their apps, not necessarily instead of the App Store, but I think it'd be cool to help discoverability of like indie apps and just make it kind of a home for them, because we really want to address like those pain points of what the indies are feeling the most. And I think if we can make that just like a good experience, I hope AltStore could become like an indie app store with just like cool ideas. Like, we're not trying to compete with the App Store on like a financial business level, because it's kind of stupid. We're never going to win. I think we can compete by having cool, fun experiences people want to try out, and they can maybe discover them easier through AltStore. Or we just make it easier to put an app on AltStore versus the App Store. And so I think that's actually what will make up the majority of AltStore's popular apps. And then there'll also be big apps like Fortnite. Like we talked about or alluded to. We have Fortnite on AltStore. We have Fall Guys. We have all that stuff. And that's also, super surreal, super crazy. And that is a very popular app. But also, like, Delta is like just as popular as Fortnite on AltStore. And just shows, these different apps really can be popular if they're just like new ideas or new experiences people haven't tried out before.
How do you see that going forward with AltStore, in terms of making sure it's this? What sort of values are you, I guess, applying to the store? I'm guessing trying to say to not let it fall into maybe some of the problems that the Apple App Store has maybe fallen into. I mean, for one thing, you obviously don't have an investment, as far as I know, right? It's all.
We do have an investment as of last month. So we did take on. So this is a big change. Is now that we are actually expanding worldwide. Like, we're actually going to launch in Japan next year.
Okay. Me
and Shane started to realize that we kind of also, similar to Fusio, needed more help to make sure that we could be running like a global app store beyond just the two of us. And so we actually talked to an investor we'd be actually talking to for a while, like for a year, not for any reason, just it was someone who happened to install AltStore several years ago and used it to install a manga reader. And so we were like, oh, okay, this is cool. Like he's using the service, he understands it. But then we wanted kind of to expand AltStore, and the Patreon, as great as it wasn't enough to like afford a third person full time. And so we basically reached out to Chris, and because also he was an early investor in Patreon and Twitch. And so we were like, okay, you've been around the creator sphere before. You actually understand what's happening. We trust you then to help like guide us to build this into like a real legitimate business, like worldwide, to kind of fill in the gaps we don't know, and also help us hire some more people. And so that happened last month, we announced that last month. And so now we have a team of people, and by team I mean 6 people total, but it's definitely a change.
Yeah. And how are you going to approach this going forward as someone who's you've now not just yourself, but you obviously have people with interests in your company, you have an investor. How do you ensure that the AltStore itself still embraces the kind of values that I guess you've always been fighting for previously?
So yeah, that was very important to us. So we've made it very clear like what our goals are, what we're trying to do. We're becoming a public benefit company with that as our mission statement, just to make it very clear that our mission is to make it easy to distribute your apps like on the open web. It's basically what we're saying. And our philosophy is we don't see AltStore as a store, really. We see it as like a way for people to download apps from developers. Like we imagine people like developers will just have a link on their website, and then tapping that link can install their app through AltStore. But we don't want to position ourselves as a gatekeeper central person. And we've made so Chris is is fully aligned with the idea. And that just keeps us out of a power position in general. If we've made it from the beginning that developers are hosting their apps, it's all going to developers. We are just a neutral middle ground. Like we don't take any commission on any in-app purchases in AltStore right now. We want to offer our own solution that's optional, and then we would take a small commission of that. But we always want to offer basically the ability to bring your own thing and have it for free. And as long as we offer that makes sure that any of our first party offerings have to be competitive, because we're competing with free.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's keeping our incentives aligned basically is the key component.
AltStore itself, I mean, it was kind of hailed as a huge step forward. I think I read an article where it referred to you guys as patient zero for this this sort of progression of opening up the app marketplace. And AltStore itself has some really great apps in it. You've obviously and some big apps from Epic as well. But it is still a relatively small group of apps that you have on there. What is it that's keeping it that small? Is that deliberate, or is that just or is there something holding back developers from making that jump into having their app on the AltStore? Or do you see it maybe just being a smaller app store that's more curated and more, like you said, more focused on kind of indie developers and getting the visibility of those apps?
It's a mix of those, but by far the number one is the core technology fee that Apple charges for apps distributed outside the App Store, which basically is apps. Every download of an app costs every download of your app, you owe Apple 50 cents, regardless of how expensive your app is, even if it's a free app. And then there are some caveats to that. Like Apple says, it doesn't count till after your first million downloads, or it doesn't count if your app doesn't make any revenue. There are some carve-outs, but fundamentally, that concept of, oh, hold on, there's a world that if my app gets popular, I could actually bankrupt myself because I owe Apple millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That fear has been by far the number one thing from our conversation with developers that have been preventing them from wanting to put their app on AltStore. And so, I don't understand. It's a very scary concept to be like, wait, why would my free app ever potentially cost me millions of downloads or millions of dollars? Like, it just doesn't compute. But so the good news about that is that's going away starting January next year. And I won't say too much, but we already have several more apps that are wanting to join starting January because the CTF is going away. So we're like immediately seeing the payoff of the CTF going away, like day one.
Yeah.
And so that's just interesting to see.
Yeah. I mean, by the time this episode goes out, this will have already happened. So
So
just
then you could see.
Exactly. You can go and check it out. It might be, as we speak, we might be seeing some great new apps coming to AltStore.
Exactly.
I think what's interesting is that one thing that you've that maybe people might assume is that you're trying to sort of break down Apple's walled garden and just make it open for like everyone like to just surge into the platform. But you've spoken before about how you're not really for the complete opening up of iOS so that anyone can do anything. You actually are still very aware of the risks and the safety involved, and it's something that you kind of want to address with AltStore. Could you talk a bit to that approach? Because I think it's maybe something that maybe people falsely think about AltStore, is that it's like a force for sort of destruction in a way.
Yeah, no, exactly. We've tried to walk this very narrow line of saying like, we like Apple. It's true. Like, I love Apple. Apple is one of my favorite companies. I am obsessed with them, but that doesn't mean like everything they do is right. And so we want to be like, hey, we want to exist to point out or honestly to push Apple in the right direction. Because I think one thing is we just think Apple is not treating developers well. We just see that happening, and we want to make the situation better for developers. But we don't want to like say Apple's evil about that. We just want to give developers like an out. We want to give them some other option. Or I think another thing is that we don't actually like, we're not trying to steal apps from the App Store. We really want the apps that Apple was rejecting from the App Store. So we were like, we're not here like to be like taking anything away from Apple. We want like the developers that we're trying to get something in the App Store that were rejected unfairly to have a chance out there. But the key is that it's the app review that's rejecting it. All these apps are fully safe with like sandboxing. Just iOS is a very secure platform by default. That's why it's amazing. Like, or one of the many reasons it's amazing. Like, apps can't do things other like systems allow it to do. Like, an app can't read other app system files. And so our line is, cool, that's a good security protection. We just want apps then to have those same security protections, but then not be blocked by weird like or weird just rules by App Store, what you're allowed to do, if that makes sense. And so we're trying to like just really try to make that nuanced take of, hey, we don't want to change iOS. iOS is a secure platform. iOS is built this way in mind to protect consumers. We just want to allow apps to do what they can do already. Like that's unlike jailbreaking, which is when you were tweaking the system and changing system behavior. Like, I was never a jailbreaker. I actually am not a fan of jailbreaking. I didn't like how it made my phone feel weird and unofficial. It kind of just made it feel dirty to me, and I didn't like that. But what I wanted was to put my own app on my phone. That I just wanted to compile myself. And so those differences I think are key. But so it's like not trying to change iOS. We want to keep it the same as what it is, but we want to allow apps to exist on iOS as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned there, you love Apple. It's you're one of your favorite companies. You love what they do, and I kind of have that same sort of internal debate of like balancing the kind of feelings of admiration for what Apple does, but also the kind of the frustrations with some of the ways that they operate too. And it seems like you have that kind of internal debate as well. But you've mentioned before how you're inspired so much by Steve Jobs, which many people are. But you specifically, you've specifically said how a lot of what you're doing is actually pulling from the Steve Jobs playbook in a way. Can you give me some like examples of how what he's done sort of influences maybe the way that you shape the way you think with AltStore?
I'll try to concrete, put this in concrete thoughts to me. But just I don't know, that philosophy Steve Jobs came from the era of, hey, we want to be able to do stuff with our computers. There's so much cool things. Look at IBM. Look at how evil IBM is doing. And we're over here today like, hey, we just want to have cool stuff on our devices. We don't want to make a bad experience. We want to just like get the stuff out there to people. Or I'd say, I don't know, Steve Jobs definitely. I feel weird comparing myself to Steve Jobs, so I don't want to do that too concretely. But just like as an idea, he was very product focused and needed that experience. And I think like that's also something for AltStores. Like as a tool, like AltStore did not need to quote unquote be. It didn't need to be as pretty as it was for a side loading tool. But
Right.
I thought it was so important that if we're doing this thing that requires you to ask for people's Apple ID and password, that we need to make sure that the experience really felt like as polished as possible. Like those little secondary characteristics. Or honestly, Delta's probably the better example. Like, yeah, just Delta was like, hey, this technology is so cool, but it's not ready for the masses. We need to figure out a way that we can shape this tech into something that most people can use, which I think is what Apple generally does such a good job about. They take really cool tech and then present it in a way that's, addressable, that people can understand. And so, I don't know, those type of ideals, I think, really carry through. We just want to do what's best for the consumer. We want to have a great product. User experience really is key. And we're not, I guess, afraid, though, to stand up for our beliefs. And, or we're also not afraid yet to use Apple's own tactics against them. Is probably another ways, because dealing with Apple, they will stonewall us in a bunch of ways. They're frustrating us. Like dealing with Apple is so frustrating, and so our kind of stance is like, okay, if Apple's gonna like do stuff, our solution is just to tell people what they're doing. Like just make them own it. Like I don't know, just like use their own thing against them. And so like that's where the whole like. When we announced there was a porn app on AltStore earlier this year, the origin for that was Apple had been blocking our apps from Apple reviews apps for AltStore, which is a whole thing. But so they actively approve and reject apps for our store. And they kept rejecting apps for our store that should have been approved. And we were so frustrated. And so we're just like, okay, fine, Apple. The way we're going to play is we're just going to show the world what you're doing. And so we announced when the porn app was approved, we said it was the first Apple-approved porn app. And just because we were trying to be like, hey, okay, Apple, we're using your playbook. If you're going to be doing this, we're going to make you own it. And it's just, I don't know, just using Apple's own tactics against them is kind of like another thing we just inherit. And that's kind of abstract, but...
I like the way you done things like that. It's clever, but it's kind of playing within the rules as well, I think, which is...
It's mirroring how they comply with the DMA. It's like they do malicious compliance, and we'll be like, okay, then let's do the same thing Apple, like just doing, we just do the same thing Apple does to show them maybe that's not okay. Do you see it now?
Well, Riley, thank you so much for chatting with me today. This has been a super interesting chat. I love everything you're doing at AltStore. I look forward to the day when I can legitimately start installing apps like Clip on my phone. Being in the UK, I'm so close yet so far.
It's coming next year, so we'll be in the UK next year. So
I look forward to that day. But before we go, I always want to finish the podcast on a positive note, with asking my guests about something in tech that gives them hope or makes them optimistic about the future. Is there anything that stands out for you?
I feel like I can't reuse it, but the Fediverse would have been my first guess, because it's so rare that I see so much positivity online anywhere, especially today. And so, I don't know, just the whole Fediverse, everyone seems very aligned with the ideals of let's just make the world better. Let's just really build a better world. And I don't know. So just seeing that really just make me feel like social networking maybe can be better than what we've assumed it's kind of always bad. And I don't know, just to see that community grow has been so inspiring to us that it makes me feel that it's also a very different thing than AI right now. And that's why I love it. It's because I can see the Fediverse growing, and that gives me hope for the future. And then I see the AI tech bros over there, and gives me so much less hope. So it's a good parallel, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely a good answer. All right, well, thank you so much, Riley. 2026 is going to be, I think it's going to be a really big year for you. So I'm excited to see it all play out for you. And thanks for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time.
And that's it for First Last Everything. Thanks again to Riley for joining me. You'll find links to everything we discussed, as well as where to find both Riley and me online in the show notes, where you'll also find a link to our feedback form. This is a Mac Stories podcast. Head to macstories.net/podcast to check out all the other shows. Thanks to the amazing Will Laporte, who does our music, and of course thanks to you for listening. I'll see you next time when my guest will be podcaster and educator David Sparks. I hope you'll join me.
Okay, let's do the whole thing again. Restart, roll it back.